Greetings, everyone. Warm welcome from Storm Overseas Education. Our speakers for today, Dr. Sanket Goel, Dr. Satish Kumar Dubey, and the PhD scholars Avinash and team for their invaluable support in bringing this webinar on miniaturized sensors today. Also welcome technology enthusiasts and students for taking time in attending this webinar today. Storm Overseas Education is glad to bring this webinar to you today in association with BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus. This is a part of the Smart Technologies webinar series, our endeavor to create awareness on Industry 4.0 technologies, innovation and entrepreneurship among the students, technology enthusiasts, budding innovators, and entrepreneurs. We conduct such webinars every week, and there is a student webinar tomorrow, 24th July, in association with Carnegie Mellon University, Australia. To know more and to attend free webinars, please download our app from Play Store or App Store. It is available in both Android and iOS platforms. I hope this webinar will give you more insights into the sensor technology, their development and applications. This would become a precursor to our course on sensor technology, which we would be launching next month. Thank you all for attending this wonderful webinar. Please follow the webinar decorum and have a great learning. Now let me introduce the speakers and the team for today. Presently, he's the Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Electrical and Electronics Engineering, BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus. Prior to this assignment, he was Associate Professor and Head of the R&D Department at University of Petroleum and Energy Studies, Dehradun, India. He did his BSc Honours in Physics from Ramjas College, Delhi University, Masters in Physics from IIT Delhi, PhD in Electrical Engineering from the University of Alberta, Canada on NSERC Fellowship in 1998, 2000 and 2006 respectively. He has worked with two Indian national labs. One is Institute of Plasma Research, Gandhinagar, and the other one is DEBEL, DRDO, India, Bangalore. As NIH Fellow, he did his postdoctoral work at Stanford University in US from 2006 to 2008. And he was also a principal investigator at A-STAR Singapore from 2008 till 2011. His research interests are MEMS, microfluidics, nanotechnology, materials and devices for energy, biochemical and biomedical applications. As a principal investigator, he has been implementing several funded projects from Defense Research and Development Organization, Department of Science and Technology, Indian Space Research Organization, MNRE, Government of India, UNESCO, European Commission, and he has been very crucial in various collaborations with groups in India and abroad. He has many awards and laurels to his name. A few to be mentioned here are prestigious Fulbright Nehru Fellowship in 2015, Department of Science and Technology Young Scientist Award in 2013, American Electrochemical Society's Best Students Paper Award in 2005, University of Alberta PhD Thesis Award in 2005, to name a few. He has traveled widely across the globe and has more than 150 publications to his name and 10 patents to his credits, including 1 US and 9 Indian patents. And he has delivered more than 65 talks till date and guided 20 PhD scholars and several master's and bachelor students. He's also a very respectful member and a senior member of IEEE, life member of Institute of Smart Systems and Structures, life member Indian Society of Electrochemical Chemistry. He's also an associate editor of IEEE Transactions on Nanobioscience, Sensors Journal, and IEEE Access and guest editor of Special Issue in Sensors, 3D printed microfluidic devices. He's also a visiting professor with the Arctic University of Norway. So I warmly welcome Dr. Sanket Goel for this wonderful webinar session. Let me also introduce Dr. Satish Kumar Dubey. He's also our second speaker. He's assistant professor at Mechanical Engineering Department, BITS Pilani campus, Hyderabad. He's an expert on modeling and simulation of multiphysics, and energy systems. His research interests include modeling simulation of microfluidic and MEMS sensor and energy harvesting devices. He's working on two sponsored projects as principal investigator, one on microsensor for soil nutrient testing with Department of Science and Technology, Agrotech sponsored, and the other as co-principal investigator on microfluidic cardiac biosensor, again, Department of Science and Technology sponsored. He has completed one sponsored project from Defense Research and Development Organization and published more than 40 papers in peer-reviewed journals and conferences. He has delivered more than 20 talks and guided 6 PhD scholars and several master's and bachelor's students. He's also a member of Institution of Engineers, life member of Indian Society of Heat and Mass Transfer, and member ASME. I welcome you, sir. Thank you for joining us in delivering a wonderful webinar session on development of miniaturized sensors and their applications. So now the technology enthusiasts and the students who have attended this webinar, I wish you a great learning, and please follow the webinar decorum and then ask questions and then as and when you're asked to. Thank you so much, one and all. Thank you, Dr. Goel, Dr. Dubey, and also the PhD scholars team, including Mr. Avinash. I hand it over to you now.
You should keep second.
Yes, yes, Avinash. Now the platform is for you.
Yeah. So now Dr. Sanket Goel is going to present.
Okay. Videos on. Video चालू कर दो. Yeah, well, good morning to all of you. Can you please see us, or can you listen to us? Is it okay? Okay, I see. I can see the movement of your lips, so I assume that is okay. Yeah, thank you so much, and very well welcome to all the participants. I can see it's going to be triple century soon. So I'm glad that in this rainy day, so many people have come, and internet is working for all of you. So this is very exciting. So we are here to deliver a small training program, and essentially this has been sponsored by the International Exchange Alumni, which is being primarily patterned by the Department of State of the US government, which is sort of having ongoing projects to support many countries and sponsor many alumni which have carried out their projects under Fulbright Nehru Fellowships in the past. So this organization Swechha, as you can see on the screen, on the top right corner. So this project is being offered by this non-governmental organization, which is based out of Delhi. And they have been giving these projects to be able to make people abreast about some of the new or upcoming technologies, like the miniaturized sensors. So this is first of the two sequence of such seminars which are being offered under this program. And we are thankful to Storm Overseas Education, primarily Mr. Jagdish, who has kindly agreed to host this, because today is the age of technology, and something using a platform by Storm Overseas Education, it will not only enhance the visibility of this program, but also it will also provide us a channel so that we can reach to a diverse kind of audience, which are looking for a new or novel career opportunities in time to come. So we are really thankful to Storm Overseas and our sponsor Swechha, our team at BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus, the MEMS Microfluidics and Nano Electronics Lab, and of course the International Exchange Alumni. I also thank my esteemed colleague, Professor Dubey, who is sitting next to me. And this presentation is a joint effort by both of us, and of course, the subsequent presentation which will be done by our PhD scholars. So I will not spend too much time to go further, and so warm welcome again, and I hope you will have a very memorable and path-breaking next 90 minutes or so. And we look forward to have a lot of questions from you. And interestingly, because we don't know the background of all the audience, there may be people who are just school passed out till the education level of PhD. There may be a diverse audience. So we seek apologies in advance if we either are too slow or we are too fast. However, we request you to please stop us and ask us questions so that we can choose a uniform pace during our presentation. So thank you very much. So we'll start now. Yeah, so, well, I mean, it will be not justified if I don't talk about COVID, because everybody is sort of one way or the other being influenced by COVID. I mean, each and every person out of the 7 billion population in the whole globe is affected directly or indirectly by COVID. So I thought to bring a slide on COVID and how this COVID is directly or indirectly relevant to the miniaturized sensor we're talking about. So because now this situation is reasonably old, I would say 6 months or at least 4 months. So I'm sure all of you are reading newspapers, and because we have a lot of time, so it gives us even more opportunities to read newspapers. So we can talk about treating, or we can talk about adding value to the COVID scenario, either by developing a device which can be used for detection, or find out ways to treat the patients. And last but not the least, which is the eventual solution, is to develop vaccines. And I'm sure that during the last week, all of you would have heard about the vaccine development scenario. Either it is our city of Hyderabad, and I'm sure the participants are all around, or the city of Pune, or the Oxford University, the recent paper which they published in Lancet about the one of the first published paper on the possibility of vaccine, and which is quite successful. So, but detection itself will play a major role. If you don't know that person has a COVID or whatever pathogens we're talking about, what is the need of treatment and what is the need of vaccine? So detection is the first step towards anything. So if you talk about when you get up in the morning and you see or you look at a watch, so you're detecting something, you're sensing something. So if you see that from the time you get up in the morning till the time you go to bed, you always keep detecting, you always keep sensing something or the other. And that detection information goes to your mind, and accordingly you decide what kind of action one needs to take. So I'm not exaggerating because I work in that area, but that's a fact that detection and sensor is an inbuilt part of our daily life. We might be sensing and detecting in those, I would say, 16 hours of our daily life, at least several hundreds of times, several hundreds of things. So detection is the key in this scenario as well. So I would like to talk about this simple graph, which talks about what needs to be detected and how it needs to be detected. So in a viral detection, one of the first thing is a patient who is going to a hospital or who needs some attention is it should be rapid. He or she cannot wait. So it needs to be rapid. It's a very troublesome disease, very painful disease. So you need to have a rapid solution. It needs to be specific. I mean, you want to ensure that you are detecting COVID. You're not detecting something else like TB or malaria or chikungunya. So it should be specific. It should not be non-interfering, which means that if you are detecting COVID, it should not be end up detecting something else, which might have a similar spectra or similar kind of sensing pattern as COVID. And it should have a prototype, which means that you can take it anywhere. It should be movable, it should be precise, and it should be turnkey. So that's why we call it more of a movable prototype. And finally, inexpensive. I mean, many people can ask me this question, why inexpensive? Cost depends on the need. I mean, I'm sure those of us who have studied economics, so law of economics is demand and supply, right? Right now, this disease is so prevalent that cost is certainly at the benchmark. So we are primarily discussing about the rapid to make it specific, non-interfering, and of course, it should be a movable prototype. And cost, if it comes with cost, effectiveness also, nothing better than that. So we are talking about all these things. So please believe me, is that when we try to address one issue out of these 5, and I'm sure there can be many issues also, but just take these 5 issues. So to address each issue, it has several research problems, several things you have to talk about. If you want to make it rapid, you want to work on many intrinsic properties to ensure that the device is truly rapid. Similarly, on other aspects also. So I will discuss some of these things. We might not have addressed the sensors for this particular case in our laboratory so far, but certainly we have tried to address in other applications. And of course, when we try to address other applications, these 5 things will definitely come into the picture. So just to share 2 pictures with you, if you quickly do Google image search, you will certainly find these 2 pictures. If you Google image COVID detection, you will find it. You cannot avoid these 2 images. So you can see a left image which talks about a company called Cepheid, which has a gene expert platform to detect some of these viruses. And they claim that they can do a rapid test in 1 hour. I mean, 1 hour itself to me is a significantly higher time, but they claim that's in 1 hour, which is very good. I will talk about PCR in a bit from now. And the second thing which you can see on the right side is the point of care antibody test, and they claim that they can do it in 5 minutes. Those of you who are interested, they can take a snapshot and they can Google this. There's a huge company called Abbott, which has brought in this particular POC device. So on the left, when I say PCR, PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction. Those of you who are non-biologists, in a nutshell, I can say that it's a mechanism by which you can amplify your nucleic acid. If you have X amount of nucleic acid in the beginning, you can get 100X or 1000X, which will ease out the detection for a user significantly. So to be able to start a rapid test, you need to detect your nucleic acid, which is found in your blood. So this is one device you can see on the left. They claim that they can do it in an hour and they can do it in 5 minutes. So a lot of people have done. So you can see that the challenges. I told you about rapidness. I told about product portability. I talked about the non-interference. I also talked about cost. So you can imagine that how much expensive they would be, how much time they're going to take, and they will definitely be having a lot of interference. And the question mark is that, can you make them portable? Can you take them to any patient's bedside? So those are all the challenges we have to talk about. And when we talk about cost, it's not just the cost of per test. It is also the cost of developing this device and cost of buying this device, right? So there are a lot of challenges. And similarly, you can see another set of images. The one which you see in front of you, it's a very small chip. I would say it's like 1 inch by 2 inch, which replaces the PCR device I showed you in this picture. And this chip can do whatever this particular device which you saw in the previous slide can do. And also this picture on the right side, while replacing the POC device which you saw in the previous slide, which is from Abbott, they claim that they can do in 5 minutes, but it's very portable. It's like a pregnancy test detection, or it's like a glucose detection kit. So there are a lot of interventions going on whereby people are trying to bring in a lot of point of care devices or a lot of small miniaturized devices. And at the same time, they're trying to have a very cheap kind of devices and a device which anybody can use. So just to prove my point, so essentially, if you can bring it from these 2 devices, which I showed you here, to this scenario, one of the common factor in these 2 development is the micro and nano devices. So unless and until you talk about the miniaturization, how do you work towards miniaturization, you cannot really realize these devices. So one has to talk about miniaturization. And when you say that, how do you proceed from these 2 pictures to these 2 pictures, a lot of interventions have been done. And in today's 90 minutes or remaining 80 minutes, we will discuss that how one can develop the same kind of strategy, whether it is nucleic acid amplification or the antibody test, which is done in 5 minutes, from a benchtop device to a handheld device or a small device. What is the strategy to be followed? So in today's discussion, we may not be essentially be talking about the COVID detection, but we'll be talking about many other detections, because COVID has its own challenges, its own fundamental requirements, like very specific environment and so on, which we do not certainly have in our lab right now. All right, so we'll discuss that in today's session. Yeah, so what is the miniaturization? So as I discussed in the beginning, that the morning to evening, you always talk about detectors, you always talk about sensors. So when you talk about the miniaturized sensors or miniaturized devices, you need to work on many things. You need to work on several components to be able to understand. So sensors, as everybody knows, to sense something, right? Like for example, in human body, you have arms, you have eyes, you have nose, you have ears, you have taste, you have many other organs which ensure that you are sensing something throughout your day. And after sensing, your organs give information to your head, to your mind, to be able to act accordingly. So your organs constantly gather the data, and the data can be of many different types. Can be mechanical. For example, you're touching something, you can find out whether it's a rough surface or a smooth surface. Or for example, thermal, which you can find out whether the surface is hot, surface is cold. And similarly, biological, you can find out whether you are seeing a cell, you are seeing a body, or you are seeing wood or some other objects. Similarly, chemicals. Similarly, optical, you can see that what kind of color is it. And magnetic. So my point to say all these things is that your organs which you have in your body can sense different kinds of data. And similarly, a microsensors also sense all kinds of data in the same manner as the bulk system, like our bodily organs or bodily senses do that. But however, the data has to be converted to information which can be given to selected parties, selected functions to be able to do a task which needs to follow a certain kind of basic principle. So any microsensor should be combined with a microelectronics. Like in human body, your mind is like electronics. Your mind is something which decides what to do, what not to do. And similarly, a microelectronics is essential for a miniaturized device to be able to decide what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. That is why the microelectronics is a brain of MEMS, like we have our own brain. So it plays smartly with the data, it receives the data, processes it, and it makes decision like our mind does. And after our mind decides what to do, what not to do, similarly, a microelectronics component decides what needs to be done. And that's why the actuators plays an important role. It triggers, it ensures that action which microprocessor decides, it comes into the existence. And then decision follows up. So in a nutshell, when you try to make a parallel with the human body, you have your sensors, your organs, you have a mind which is like a microelectronics, and your mind tells a particular organ what to do. Similarly, if you talk about a miniaturized device, you have sensors, you have electronics, and you have actuators. So it talks about the overall development of a miniaturized device which can tell what to do. So you have to work on these three components. And you can imagine that when I just work on microsensors, I have to deal with one of these data, because my data can be different depending on the applications. For example, I talked about nucleic acid amplification, and that's where the temperature plays an important role. I need to ensure that my DNA passes through a certain temperature. So I need to make sure that I need to develop a device which is a thermal management device, which is having a particular temperature, a required temperature. So similarly, for other kinds of data, I have to ensure that the relevant device is developed. So huge amount of interventions have to be done to ensure that we have particular sensor. So just to give you a kind of a cut diagram of a smartphone, or everybody carries a smartphone. You can imagine that in a smartphone itself, you have at least 10 different kinds of microsensors. You can see, be it a CPU, be it a front camera, back camera, a CMOS image sensor, a micro mirror, filters, of course, accelerometer, gyroscope, compass, pressure sensor. So all these are nothing but miniaturized sensors. And huge amount of development has been done for last at least 50 to 60 years to be able to come to the current shape where we have smartphone which has 15-20 sensors and which anybody can carry in their pocket. So just to summarize an outline for this particular next 75 minutes or so we'll discuss why do we work on micro devices, and what are the different components, some aspects about the microfluidics, but we'll be majorly spending time on different projects which are ongoing in our lab. And for those of you who are interested to work in this area, how can they start? And of course, we'll summarize it. These are two different devices which we have developed in our lab. The first one was again for a pathogen detection. Particularly, we have used the tuberculosis sample in this case, and it was working quite nicely. And this one, one of our PhD scholars will discuss how this device can be used for various sensing applications. So what is micro and nano? I'm sure all of you know that micro means small scale, right? So something which can be fabricated in a small environment. For example, not in the kitchen. You need a very specialized and very dedicated environment. Electro, I'm sure all of you know, which can have the electrical signal readout, mechanical functionality, and it can be prototype. It can be developed packaged in a small system. So that's how this technology is named as micro electromechanical systems. So I am very fond of showing this picture. So these are 4 different pictures, of course, black and white. So you can imagine that, excuse me, these are quite old. So you can imagine that usually I ask this question to my students, but I can answer this question myself. These are 4 different industries which you were seeing at least 100 to 150 years ago. So these 4 industries are textile, automobiles, energy, and biomedical. So you can imagine that there have been a lot of development which has taken place during the last 150 years or so. Now we see them quite automated. So even a car, even an automobile which you see on the road, a same model or same make, they will be 100% same, which was not true in Ford Foundry or whichever car manufacturer you can take. So now you can see, because of automation, because of smart manufacturing, smart electronics, now things have changed. Of course, this will continue down the road to have even more interventions. So that's where the accuracy, cost, and time plays an important role. And in a nutshell, or in a short, we can call it ACT technology. So yeah, to be able to develop the accurate devices, we need to ensure that they can be used for particular applications. For example, any detection. So for example, if you want to detect COVID, so they should be accurate, because if it is not accurate, we cannot really decide the kind of treatment the person needs to take. So accuracy should be depending on the application. For such biomedical applications, accuracy can be 0.001% or even less than that. So depending on what you are looking at, the accuracy will be defined. And of course, cost, again, as I said before, it depends on the urgency of the detector, the cost, whether it comes at the first or at the end. And finally, it should be fast. So again, the accuracy, cost, and the ultra fast or rapidness, and the priority of these A, C, and T will depend on the urgency, will depend on the type of sensing we are trying to do. For example, again, COVID, I'm sure the rapidness and accuracy will come before than the cause itself. But when you're talking about, for example, malaria diagnostics, because it is happening for last 20 years, and people have tried to find out many applications or many solutions to it. So I'm sure cost may come first before accuracy and the rapidness. So it depends on what you're talking about. Yeah. So just to give you an example, I mean, you can see, those of you can see, I know it's not a very good resolution. This shows on a logarithmic scale on the x-axis that how different objects around us are defined. As you can see that on the right side, we are talking about universe in meters, and as small as atoms, which has of course the atomic range or 10 to minus 10 meters. So you can see that many objects around us, like human hair, around microns diameter. Earth is around 10 to the 10 kind of meter diameter, and so on. So different objects around us are having different diameters. You can see that if you compare with a tennis ball, how the water molecules will look like, and so on. So you can sort of appreciate with this that when you go to miniaturized devices, when you're targeting the biomedical applications or such small scale applications, you need to ensure that the governing laws are also working in those scales. The laws which are working for tennis ball may not work for the cells. For example, the gravitational force, which is predominantly working for the tennis ball, may not work for the cell, because cells is a part of the body which is again under the gravitational force. So you have to ensure that the governing laws for a different scale are different when you start working on a particular domain. So just to again give you more examples, on the left side, you can see some of the naturally available nanoscale or microscale materials or substances. You can see the ant, you can see the fly ash, you can see the atom of silicon, the fundamental PCB which everybody carries in their pockets, and DNA. And on the right side, you can see some of the man-made nano or microscale materials which can be fabricated in clean room. So just to give you an example that you can also develop those materials smartly in a clean room if you have access to such facilities. So just to give you this. So again, why microscale? So one of the factors which I will discuss in the next slides, in the next 2 minutes, is one of the most important reason. And you can read this slide. I mean, I'm not going to read every word, but I will focus on one of the first factor is the better surface to volume ratio. And those of you who have done a simple mathematics, if I give you a sphere, and I'm sure you know the surface area of a sphere. If those of you who can appreciate it, you can try to bring out your pen and piece of paper. You can write down the surface area of a sphere, and you can also write down the volume of a sphere, same sphere with a radius r. And I just give you a quick homework, or quick, I would say 2-minute homework. If you can divide the surface area of a sphere by the volume of a sphere, what you get. And I request you, you can write down on the chat box, those of you who can get the answer. If I give you a sphere of radius r, if you divide the surface area to volume, what should be the answer? And I'll appreciate if somebody can provide the answer on the chat box. I'm really happy with those people. Anyways, I'll proceed further. I could see some answers, I think. Yeah, 1 by r. Well, the 1 by r is, I mean, the r is correct, 3 by r. I mean, Lasya and Kaustubh, I really appreciate your hard work, and I hope that the Jagdish can appreciate them in some way, if he can. Yeah, I can see many good answers. I'm really happy with all those who are giving right answers. In fact, one upon R is also close to right answer, so I will not discourage them as well. Thank you so much, Sonali, Mahek, Dhananjay, Chinmay, Abula, and all of them. Thank you. So yeah, yeah, Isha, I cannot read all of your name, but thank you so much. Yeah. So if I proceed further, yeah. So yeah, again, I just tried to solve this problem. So 3 by R. So you can imagine that, just to give you 2 examples, if you see grain dust, those of you who play Diwali, and I'm sure all of you do play Diwali, and I'm not sure this time you will play that Diwali, but if you see the grain dust, if you have that small Diwali bomb, so if you toss it on the wall, you can see that there will be some sound, and the reason is that because that small mini bomb has the grain dust. But if you see the grain which is in a coarse form, that will not be flammable. So essentially, the Diwali bomb which creates explosion because it is in nanoscale. It is crushed to a dust format, and that's why it gives me sound. And similarly, that salt. In the old days, we used to get salt which is very coarse salt, and we used to crush them in the house by using chakki or whatever it is. I remember in my village days, we used to have those kind of salt, not the fine salt which we see today. So of course, the fine salt can be dissolved much quickly. And of course, why it is happening? Because of the surface area. I hope you can appreciate it. So yeah, just for a few more sentences about MEMS, and I will close it, and I will give it to my colleagues who can take it forward. So just a technology where we can not only have the micro component, but also the electronic component. Many domains. I will again not read each word by word, but maybe somehow the organizers can provide the video so that the participants can go through once more, and we can save some more time. So you can see that a lot of diverse applications it has, and a lot of commercial applications to the MEMS devices or miniaturized devices can have, from the consumer electronics to the smartphone components to the biomedical applications. Yeah, so before I conclude, I just thought to give you some economic scenario also for the miniaturized devices. So a lot of interventions are there, a lot of boom is there for this miniaturized devices. As you can see that a lot of money is being pumped in to be able to work on these devices. And of course, it has multiple application domain also. As you can see that not only from the smartphone side, but also touchscreen, energy harvesting, RFIDs, and so on. So a lot of applications which these devices have, and also huge amount of career opportunities. Although in India we do not have a fab lab per se, but designing, prototyping, PCB making, all those are done in India. And I hope that few companies will be exploring the possibilities to have a fab lab in India as well, primarily the Applied Materials or maybe Google. There are a lot of talks are going on to have fab lab in India. So a lot of career opportunities. So you can see these talks or these websites if you would like to know more about such devices. Yeah. So if you would like to develop a such mini-sized device, one of the first thing you have to talk about is to design. For example, if anybody wants to do anything, whether small or big, you always have a design either in the mind or a piece of paper. Similarly, when you want to make these devices, you have to make a design. You have to find the correct method to fabricate them. You have to find the correct method to be able to detect them. As I told you in the beginning, whether it is a magnetic signal or optical or electrical or whatever, you have to find a suitable method. And finally, you have to use them for some application. So this is something which anybody has to take care of when he or she would like to start working in these devices. So many applications, and some of the applications which we'll be covering in today's remaining, I hope, 50 minutes or so. I think I'll stop it here so that my colleagues can sort of take over. There are 5 or 6 PhD scholars who will be discussing their work, and I hope they will be starting from very fundamental skills to go to the real life applications. This slide tells you when you are using a fluid inside a MEMS device, you can control, because in the human body, always the fluid is there in the form of blood, which is flowing inside the arteries or capillaries in the human body. So if you can mimic them outside the human body, you can develop many detectors or many sensing devices, and you can mimic what's happening inside the human body. Right. So I think I'll stop it here, and I think I'll move on. I think. Yeah. So this is our lab, MEMS Microfluidics and Nanoelectronics lab. We have around 2,500 square feet area, and we are sitting right in the lab right now. We have very many faculty members from different domains and different departments. And right now we have 15 or rather 16 PhD scholars and a few part-time scholars and 1 postdoctoral fellow. And we are funded by many government agencies, as earlier mentioned by Mr. Jagdish. And we work in many different areas. Again, all of them are targeting towards developing sensors or novel materials. Avinash? Yeah, so I think I'll really stop here. I have told you already 3 times, but I'll now really take a pause and I'll hand over to other speakers. Thank you very much. And if you have a quick question, I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, I'm Jagdish here. Thank you, Dr. Goel, for a wonderful introduction on the miniaturized sensors. And I request all the participants to post the questions in the chat. We would make a note of those questions, and then probably the concerned people will answer to each and every question that you pose there. Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah, please hand it over to the next team.
Yeah. This is how we'll come to this later. Maybe you can show these slides later. Yeah, this is yours, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So good morning, everyone. Myself, Murali Mohan. So I will be explaining all this outline work. So first I will start my work on paper-based miniature platform for hydrogen sensing. Then it will be, the next topic will be enzymatic biofuel cell, that will be explained by Prakash Ravatkar. And next, membrane microfluidic fuel cell will be explained by Tata Rao. And next, 3D printing micro device, 3D printing technology as well as portable for nitride detection will be explained by Abhishek Paul. And photolithography process and is when using with the direct laser writing will be explained by Srikanth. And next, LIG, laser induced graphene, will be explained by Avinash. So I'll start my work on paper-based miniaturized platform for hydrogen sensing. So this is the motivation behind this hydrogen sensing. So hydrogen will be using in a diverse applications like in industrial. So in industrial, it will be used in a boilers for as a corrosion resistance. Even in the agriculture to make the pesticides, hydrogen will be using in a lot of production of pesticides. And even the aerospace application, hydrogen is used as a fuel. And in the pharmaceuticals also to treat diseases like to make the drugs for the tuberculosis also will be using. Even in the veterinary applications also hydrogen will be using. But even though because of these diverse application, there are some harmful effects using this hydrogen. So these hydrogen residues may pollute the water, air as well as the soil, and it might lead to carcinogenic, and also it can damage the central nervous system also. It may damage sometimes DNA, liver as well as kidneys and brain. And even hydrogen can be easily absorbed through the skin, so it might lead to the skin related problems also. So with this motivation, we worked on the paper-based platform for this. So this is a schematic diagram for this paper-based platform for the hydrogen sensing. So here we had used this Whatman filter paper, and we screen printed these two electrodes, that is a carbon as well as a silver electrodes. And here we had used a working electrode as a graphite sheet, and this graphite sheet we had modified with the copper oxide nanoparticles that we had done through electrode deposition method. And this entire process we had used 20 microliter of working sample. And this is a reaction zone where the reaction will be taking place. And this is a video regarding that. So first, initially we will be preparing the mask using with the CO2 laser, and then this mask is placed on the screen printing, and below that we'll be placing this Whatman filter paper, and this is a carbon conductive paste. So with this, initially we'll be preparing these two electrodes, that is counter electrode as well as the reference electrode. And after that preparation of these two electrodes, we'll be working on this graphite sheet. So before that, we'll be placing this to make it in the dry. So we'll place it in the oven, and then one of the electrode will be modified with the silver paste to make it in a reference electrode. So why? Because like it has to maintain the constant potential. Then it is a preparation of the working electrode. For this, electrode deposition method has been used. And for this electrode deposition, copper sulfate and magnesium sulfate will be used. And next, this is to create a wax barrier to make the sample of 20 microliter, to make it a constant volume of 20 microliter. We had used this wax barrier method. So for this, we'll be using this laminator at a temperature of 90 degrees centigrade. And then after creating this wax barrier, the entire fabrication will be done on this. And after this, we had characterized this working electrode. There's a graphite sheet, and you can see this SEM images of this plain graphite sheet as well as the modified with the copper oxide particles with the SEM images. And also we had done this EDX analysis, and along with this, we also done this Raman analysis, FTIR as well as XPS. And here we can see for this entire for hydrogen sensing, we had used two techniques. That is, one is cyclic voltammetry technique, one is differential pulse voltammetry technique. So for sensing, we had used the cyclic voltammetric sensing at 20 micromolar of hydrogen. And this is a comparison graph between the plain graphite sheet as well as the graphite sheet which was modified, electrode depositor modified with the copper oxide nanoparticles. And this is a scan rate effect that we had done. So the scan rate effect we had done, we had got like 10 to 80 millivolts per second. And to find out the LOD, limit of detection, we had used this differential pulse voltammetry. And the linear range which we have got like 1 micromolar to 7 micromolar. And along with this, the interference study also we had done, that is with the hydrogen peroxide. Why? Because like hydrogen mainly it is used as a rocket fuel, so it will be mixing with the hydrogen peroxide. So definitely we need to check the interference, and we got a zero interference with that hydrogen peroxide. Along with this, the real samples like water samples we have took, like one is tap water, one is lake water, and we got very good recovery percentage on the paper-based platform. And this is the conclusions, like even in the schematic diagram we have seen like only 20 microliter of the working sample we have used, and all this real samples also analysis also we had done. And next topic will be discussed by Prakash.
Thank you, Murli. My name is Prakash Revatkar, and I am pursuing PhD under the supervision of Professor Sanket Goel. So today I will be discussing about the microfluidic enzymatic biofuel cell for energy harvesting and glucose sensing. So as you know, the sensors are the integral part of the human life. So if you take the example of the day-to-day life, the smartphone and then smartwatch and the earbud, these are the portable devices which are being currently people are using in their day-to-day life. So similarly, this is the picture, and these highlighted are the artificial organ which are currently being used in the human body. So the problem with this artificial organ which are currently running on the lithium-based battery. So whenever we are talking about the battery, there will be always the duration constraint. Means after some times that battery becomes discharged. So there will be a necessity to change that battery after particular time duration. So this replacement procedure is always discomfort with patient, and for that battery we need to pay the more money. And after paying that much amount of money also, it will not produce the sustainable power. So there is a need of the low cost sustainable power and not to be replaceable battery, so that we can avoid this complex process. So this can be overcome with the help of the enzymatic biofuel cell. So this is the fuel cell which is utilize the bodily enzymes and the bodily glucose and oxygen, and that convert the energy, and that with that energy we can run this artificial implanted organ. So talking about the enzymatic biofuel cell, enzymatic biofuel cell is the part of subset of the biofuel cells. Biofuel cell is nothing but to convert chemical energy into the electrical energy via electrochemical redox reaction. So these are the subset of the biofuel cell. So here on the anode and cathode side, we are using the particular enzyme, so that can produce that will be help to the proper electrochemical redox reaction. So as you can see here in the first picture, this is the one typical configuration which have been currently most commonly used in the enzyme any kind of fuel cell, because there are the two electrolytes. One is glucose and second one is the oxidant. So and when we pass it throughout the anode and cathode, it will generate the energy. So the second image is the schematic. As you can see, there are the two electrode, anode and cathode, and that electrode electrode is modified with the help of two different types of enzymes. So anode side, the most commonly used enzymes are the glucose oxidase and glucose dehydrogenase. And on the cathode side, the lactase and the bilirubin oxidase. So when the glucose came in contact with the anode side, so oxidation will be happened, and with that oxidation, the electron will be released, which will be transferred to the cathode side, and proton will be gone through the virtual membrane. So this leads to generate the energy. So initially, when we fabricate any cells, so both the material will be same, and after the modification of particular enzyme, it will act as an anode and cathode. So there are several methods are available. People have developed for the for biofuel cell, but just because of if you want to talk about the most common, the most popular is the 3D printing, then photolithography, soft lithography, the paper-based devices, and the soft lithography. But just because of even we are also working on the almost all of the technology, but just because of time constraint, today I'm discussing about the two technology. The first one is nothing but the paper-based microfluidic glucose biofuel cell. So here we have used the filter paper as a microchannel, and for the bioelectrode purpose, we have used the Bucky paper. Bucky paper is nothing but the multi-wall carbon nanotube compose the paper, which is commercially available. So these are the fabrication steps for the fuel cell fabrication. So first we have taken the microscopic glass side, then we have used the double-sided tissue tape for the proper adherence. This is the Y-shaped channel which are fabricated with the help of the CO2 laser, and finally we have integrated the electrode on the Y-shaped paper channel, and the complete platform is realizing the 3D printed platform, so that one side you can see here the anode light and one side is the cathode light. So this is the real-time picture of the complete fuel cell. So here, this fabricated fuel cell is generated the power of 100 microwatt per centimeter square. So this is more than sufficient for the powering the portable devices, because for the implanted organ, the power needed is to be in the range of 10 microwatt to 80 microwatt. It is depending upon the organ to organ. And in the similar device, we have used that commercial beverages like Mountain Dew, Pepsi, 7-Up, and watermelon fresh juice. So because all these beverages contain the glucose, and so with the help of that particular sources also we can harvest the energy. The next technology is the 3D printed technology, and here we have used the pencil as a bioelectrode. Last 7 to 8 years onwards, our group is engaging with this particular enzymatic biofuel cell. So initially so in this case we have used the commercially available pencil graphite lead as a bioelectrode. So in this case we have utilized all the possible grades of pencil, and we have optimized the grade H. It will be the good for the anode side, and 5H will be the good for the cathode side. And based on that, this optimized configuration, we have fabricated 2 different micro channel, and we have inserted, and we have made the complete fuel cell together. So this kind of fuel cell is producing the power of 18 microwatt per centimeter square, and this is also enough to power the portable devices. So these are the 2 technology that we have used for the successful fuel cell fabrication. So coming to the diverse potential application. So as I told you, it can be used for the implanted organ, and also if we implant it on the particular animal, so it can be used as a cyber security system. And as we are using the glucose as an electrolyte, so we can be sense the glucose from the body. And also if we implanted a particular animal, it can be if you put the small any devices like kind of voice recorder or the video recorder, so it can be used for the surveillance also. And the interesting application of this fuel cell in the remote area, if we implant the complete setup on the tree, that will because tree also is having the kind of some source of the glucose, some particular tree, so it can be also used as a surveillance purpose. Thank you, and next topic will be explained by the Tata Rao.
Yeah, good morning, one and all. Thank you, Prakash. Yeah, so myself is Tata Rao. I'm on PHS scholar in the MMNE lab. So my topic is actually the miniaturized membraneless microfluidic fuel cell. Yeah, actually the Prakash has explained the principle of the fuel cell, but this one is a different thing. It is a chemical-based fuel cells. So actually is the motivation of the fuel cell. The first decade is a fuel cell, and it is an alternate one of the power source, because these are real-time applications is very needful to the low-cost fabrication. At the same time, is very portable applications. That's the reason nowadays very focus on the portable microfluidic fuel cell point of view. So actually, the definition of the fuel cell is convert the chemical energy into electrical energy to the redox reactions within the cell. So this one is a very clean and efficient and reliable power generation source. So the previously Prakash explained the enzymatic biofuel cell, but these topic is a completely different. These fuel and oxygen is different. These are some chemical based fuel cell. So the fuels are the hydrogen and methanol, ethanol, and different. The same oxygen also is a different. I think hydrogen peroxide, oxygen something. So here see is a different number of applications available in the reality. So one is the Navy and defense application. The next one is the portable power banking application, and next one is the torch applications. Nowadays is a very emerging thing is the portable applications in the macro to micro applications. These thing is a different compared to the macro. These ones are very emerging technology in the micro portable applications. And next, see, this is one of my topic is the LIG based microfluidic fuel cell. So then how to fabricate the total fuel cell? And see, this one is my prototype model of the LIG based microfluidic fuel cell. So this one is the based on the LIG electrodes. This one is the PDMS channel. This is the inlets, outlets. Then see the step-by-step process of the fuel cell fabrication. This one is the bottom support of the fuel cell. There is a PMMA material. This one is the after continue the bottom support. Then is the electrodes. It's the anode and cathode. These are habilitated by the CO2 laser. These anode and cathode. The gap between the 1 mm. These desired dimensions. These are the connectors. After then fabricate this one. There's a PDMS channel top of the layer. So this one is used the flow through the channel. And next one, this one is the top of the layer. There's a complete the fuel cell using the 2 acrylic material, and same time is a laser induced graphene electrodes and the PDMS channel. So this one is a completely I'm using the fuel cell setup with the bolt nut mechanism. And next, this one is the second step of the LIG microfluidic fuel cell is the inlets and outlets. So this one is a completely my schematic experimentation setup of the LIG based microfluidic fuel cell. And at the same time, see this one is the orthographic projection of microfluidic fuel cell. This one is a front view and the top view and the side view. These is a different orientation of and visible of this one. And the main thing, see here, fabrication is involved in the different techniques. So this one is a electrode is fabricated by the laser induced. This one is a CO2 laser, and the PDMS. This one is fabricated by the soft lithography technique. And next one, this one is the top of the layer using the same thing. Using the CO2 laser. This is the PMMA material. And out of all things, this is step-by-step process of the fabrication of the fuel cell. This one is the prototype model. And after successfully fabricate of the LIG fuel cell and using the formic acid as a fuel and sulfuric acid as a oxidant, and flow through the different fluids and using the peristaltic pump and the performance investigation by the electrochemical workstation. And see, we are choosing the different fluids, the 6 ml per hour and 12 ml per hour, 24 and 30, 36. And this one is the different fluid, the corresponding of the fuel cell performance. There is a current density and power density. And the dotted line is the current density. This one is the maximum current density achieved by the LIG fuel cell. Then corresponding the power density achieved by the different fluids. Out of 5 fluids, this is 24 ml per hour. This gives the maximum performance of the fuel cell. See the 24, the near to the maximum open circuit voltage is a 700 millivolt. Then corresponding is the power density is a 92 plus microwatt power. Then corresponding the current density is a 785 plus microwatt per centimeter square. And this is the performance of the fuel cell and using the different portable applications. And this one is the output power and output energy. At the same time, the reality applications, we need some stability of the fuel cell, because the portable applications, we need some supply the power of the fuel cells to the portable electronic application. That one is a micro to macro application also. At the same time, is one of the main objective of the stability of the fuel cell in the reality application. So here they see the black color dotted line is the corresponding of the 24 ml per hour. This is a maximum 3.5 hours stability in the fuel cell. So nowadays is the most of applications we need some stability and continuous supply the power to the portable applications. So that's the reason I think the stability also one of the main parameter. That's the reason we have study of the sustainable study of the LIG based microfluidic fuel cell. And main thing is this one is at the same time different fluid techniques also is involved. This one is the techniques, and this one is actually is a LIG fuel microfluidic fuel cell. And next one is continue one of my colleague, and the topic is the development of the micro device using the FDM based data pending. So Abhishek will join.
Good afternoon, everyone. So today we are talking about the sensing applications. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 3D printed device for the sensing application. So here, what I've tried to do is I've tried to use the 3D printing methodology to print a device which is of of small size. So so let's go with the step 1. So we to manufacture any material or any product, basically we have 2 approaches. We can have top-down approach or we can have bottom-up approach. So with the top-down approach that we conventionally see, what we do, we take a material or we take we can say a block, and what we do, we just try to remove the material so that we can get the shape or the size of the product that we finally want to achieve. So this here you can see in the part 1, this is the conventional method of obtaining a 3D object. But as consequently, you can see that we have a lot of waste also. But there is one more method that we can go for, that is bottom up approach. Here we directly go with the material, then we try to use the material in such a way that we are able to build the 3D object. So what is the in between steps? The between steps is that we take the material, we then melt it, and we melt it partially, and then what we do is we then deposit it layer by layer and layer by layer until we are able to achieve the final 3D object. So in this method, we are able to, we can see that the wastage is quite less, and this is quite good. So to achieve this, what are the steps? How can we do that? So this can be used, this can be done by using the CAD/CAM. So where a digital design is prepared first. First, we prepare a digital design in the software. Then we just convert that file into such a format that the printer here, the 3D printer, can access and process. And after that, when the 3D printer is able to process that information, process that design, we are able to deposit it layer by layer to achieve the final part. And finally, we go for the inspection to check what quality we are able to achieve and what modifications we need to do. So this is the second method, which is bottom-up method. So basically, this is called as fuse deposition methodology. So here we are able to, how we can do it is we are able to, we are using the thermoplastic. So mostly we are using thermoplastic. So I'll show you in the next slide how we are using the thermoplastic and how we are able to produce the 3D object. So here you can see that in this schematic, we use the thermoplastic in the form of filaments. It is in the form of rolls, and we are able to just extrude it. We are able to take the filament down, and we have here a heated nozzle, heated head, which partially melts the filament, and we are able to deposit it the way we want. And the good part is that here this either the head of the device or the platform on which we want to print, it can move in all the dimensions, can be moved in X, Y, or Z directions. So by using the precise movement of the head or the platform, we are able to print the final object of our choice. So this method provides flexibility in a way, because we are able to, we can make many different kind of complex designs, and we have to do simply, we have to put that to the machine and it will print us. So the same machine can give us more kind of designs that we require. Also, thing is, since we are printing this material, this object, we can use different kind of filament or different kind of the precursor required, because sometimes we want our object to be conductive. Sometimes we want it to be flexible. So according to those requirements, we can choose the kind of filament that we require. So for my purpose, what I needed is I wanted to print one device which can give me sensing application. So what I did is, the step one, I just using the software, I prepared this cell kind of structure in which you can see there are 3 holes are there. These 3 holes are intentionally kept. In the next step, I'm able to design, I'm providing a design so that I can fill these holes with these 3 electrode like looking object. And after that, when I combine these, this is the final device that I'm able to get, which has a cell which is kind of empty area where I can put the solution that I want to detect. So in the next step, you can see here in the video that I am basically trying to 3D print the design that I made, that I prepared. And here you can see that this is the finally prepared 3D designed device that I have. And here you can see that I'm using this device to detect the analyte here, which I've kept in the cell, which is in the form of solution. So since I'm going to detect the analyte electrochemically, so I'm using conventional 3 electrode system. You can see here electrode 1, electrode 2, electrode 3. So first electrode is basically working electrode, second one is counter electrode, and third one is reference electrode. So when I do the cyclic voltammetry, I can see, I'll just try to explain because some of you might not be knowing what exactly electrochemistry is. So what we do is we try to vary, as you can see on the x-axis we have the voltage, and on the y-axis we have the current. So as we vary the voltage, so what happens is the current increases and then it decreases subsequently. So depending on the peak that we are able to achieve, every different solution has their characteristic peak. So based on that peak, we can identify whether that analyte is there in the solution or not. So here, as you can see, that simple one steps, like see, I prepared the 3D printed device in single step, and this is very simple, and I'm able to detect nitrite here. So which is very good. Also, as my mentor said, that it is very important that when we prepare a device, it is very important that it is very specific to the device. We do not want to detect anything else as something we do not want to. So what I did is, here we have, apart from the nitrite, I just tried other analytes also. So you can see that for other analytes, I'm getting no response as such, but for the nitrite, I can get a clear response. So this kind of defines that my device is very specific. So now the next step is that concentration versus peak, concentration versus the current. So for different concentrations that I have tried, I'm able to get the peak, and so I can go low as 2 micromolar. So this can be designated as my limit of detection. So the in conclusion, I can say that I'm able to fabricate and design and produce a device which I've done like in single step. There are no multiple steps required for that. I can go for a concentration range for 25 to 1500 micromolar. The detection limit is 2 micromolar, and the sample size that I've taken is very small. And I'm able to successfully detect nitrite and avoid any other detection at the same time. So taking further the 3D printed method, what I can do, I can go for even one step ahead, and I can detect not just the analyte, but as well as the electrical conductivity and the concentration. Those also can be detected. For that, I have used photometric method. Photometric method, basically in photometric method, what happens is, let's say that we want to detect some analyte X, and I just make it go through a reaction, and after the reaction the color changes. So based on the color change, it will absorb different wavelength. So based on the absorbance of the different kind of wavelength, I can predict, or I can accurately say what concentration it has. So here I'm not just detecting the concentration, but also I'm able to detect the pH and the electrical conductivity. I'll show you in this slide. Here you can see that there is slight change in color as the fluid passes through this microfluidic channel, and here it is becoming big pinkish. So based on the wavelength of it, I can accurately detect what concentration we have. And also we can see here we have a square cell. I hope that you are able to see. So what I've done is I have connected copper electrodes, copper strips basically, to see what conductance I have. So since conductance is directly proportional, we can just relate it to the conductivity. So that way I'm able to measure the conductivity, pH, as well as the concentration. So this is one step further. And the good part is that all the part from the top to the bottom, everything is made by 3D printing. So we can say that 3D printing can be a way by which we can provide good sensitivity and detection. So thank you. Next will be my colleague, Shrikant. He'll be presenting his work. Hello everyone. Today I'll be talking about how to develop photo patterns or micro patterns using a photolithography process. So the name lithography is existing from past 18th century. So lithography in context of MEMS defines that transferring of patterns onto a substrate. So photolithography also is called as optical lithography or UV lithography. So it is nothing but transfer of micro patterns onto a photosensitive polymer. So the name itself indicates photolithography, where we use light. So we didn't use any normal light, we use a UV light. The UV light is transferred onto a photosensitive polymer, so which behaves differently when UV is shined on it. So in this session, we'll be talking about negative dry film photoresist. However, there will also be a positive photoresist as well. So there will be also a positive photoresist. So negative and positive behave differently when UV shined over them. So what happens when a negative photoresist is used? So when it is exposed to UV light, the area which is shined over will be staying after development process, whereas the area which is not shined or exposed to the UV will be eliminated. So we'll be using, after shining the UV, we'll be using a development process, which will be discussed in detail. So the developer solution that we'll be using are 3 developer solutions. First one is sodium carbonate, 1% of sodium carbonate, and we use an etching solution, which is a ferric chloride, and also we use sodium hydroxide solution. So these are the solutions, these are the compositions of mixtures that we use for developing. They are, as already discussed, sodium carbonate of 1% in 100 ml of water, and ferric oxide. It depends on the size of the material of the amount that you add. So ferric chloride will be around 5 to 20% in 100 ml of water, and sodium hydroxide pellets. So this is a 3-step etching process or developing process. So we'll show you in detail in a clear video. So first of all, we'll try to understand the basic steps which are involved in a photolithography process. So it all starts with a substrate. The substrate could either be a glass substrate or a silicon wafer. So this silicon wafer or glass substrate will be coated with a photoresist, which could either be a dry film, which comes in the form of sheet, or liquid photoresist, which comes in the form of a liquid. Now what we do is, in this conventional lithography process, we basically design a mask initially. So designing a mask depends on usage of cutter plotter, or in this process we have used CO2 laser machine to design a particular mask. So what this mask does is, it prevents the UV to pass over the mask onto the photoresist. So this photoresist is called as photosensitive polymer. So photosensitive, the name itself indicates, it is very much sensitive to light, especially UV light. So this is UV exposure. When UV is exposed onto the photoresist, this material will be staying after development. If this material is stayed after development, then that photoresist is called as negative photoresist. On the other hand, whereas for positive photoresist, the area on which the UV light is shined, it will be eliminated after development process. So this is a significant difference between the positive and negative photoresist. Based on the applications, you will be using either positive photoresist or negative photoresist. In many of the applications that we use in our lab, we use a negative photoresist. This is quite easier. I'll tell you why it is easy, because we use a different process to develop this photoresist. We'll be covering in the next slides. So I'll just show you a detailed procedure of how to fabricate a microchannel on a PCB, printed circuit board. So printed circuit boards comes with, it's also called as copper cladded board. So this is a typical video of how. So it all starts with a laminator. So we'll set a temperature to 90 degrees centigrade and a speed of 1 for rollers. So we take a copper cladded board. So this copper cladded board is covered with this dry film photoresist, and this is passed over these hot roll laminators. So we need to make sure that there are no air gaps while passing this substrate onto these rollers.
because if there are any air gaps, it will affect our pattern. So post lamination, we'll be cutting these extra edges and we place our mask. You can see this mask with a different design. So this design is cut using a CO2 laser machine, and this mask will be placed over the substrate using simple sellotape. And this is a UV exposure unit, which also contains vacuum in it to remove any air gaps. So we lock it and turn on the vacuum and just give the energy, the UV energy to it. It takes around 20 seconds, that's it. So after that, we'll take out the substrate and slowly remove the mask from the substrate. So post removal of the mask, this is how the substrate looks like. You can see the pattern, which is very much darker over here because of UV. And first we are putting in sodium carbonate to remove the excess material of sodium photoresist. Then we put in ferric chloride to remove the excess copper which is in the boundaries. And now this photoresist material has to be removed by placing this in the sodium hydroxide solution. So post that, we can see a pattern with just copper with it. So this gives a diverse applications in circuitry. So you can create very small circuits based on the mask that you design. So moving on, the main disadvantage of this conventional or PCB using this photolithography processes, it requires a mask. So as you see, you need a mask over here. So you need a mask. So when the application requires complex designs in the pattern, the design of mask would be very much difficult. So to overcome this, we use fabrication of microfluidic patterns using direct laser writing. So direct laser writing is a process where you eliminate the need of mask. So this is how the machine looks like. So it consists of a static laser head of 405 nanometer, and this is a stage, this is XY stage which can move. So what we do is we design whatever pattern we want and convert that into a DXF file. We usually use design softwares like AutoCAD or CorelDRAW, and we convert that into a DXF file and we bring that into a operating software. It is called LazyCam, which is an open source software. What that does is it converts the DXF files into G codes, and that G code is directly sent to this machine. So what the G code will be transferred to this horizontal and vertical stage. So when the design is given to this, the stage moves accordingly to the design. So this is how we prepare. It all starts with preparation of the substrate, which we have already covered in the conventional photolithography. After that, this is your substrate, and this substrate will be placed at this position. Post that, since already we have given the design with G code, the table will be moving accordingly. So these are a few micro patterns that we have fabricated. These are just to show the repeatability. This figure is especially to show the repeatability of the machine. And we have gone up to a minimum of 30 microns. 30 microns width. And since we're talking about sheets, it's a dry film sheet which comes with a uniform thickness of 35 microns thickness, and width also we've gone up to 40 microns. And the second picture shows straight walls, and the third picture depicts the straight edges. Or we are working on a PCR application as well, so we have designed a micro channel for it as well. And below it shows the scanning electron microscopic images, which is depicting very vertical walls, and also repeatability can be seen. So this is one of the best way for fabricating microchannels, which comes with diverse applications. So moving on to the applications. So one of them is fabrication of interdigitated microelectrodes using on a copper cladded board, which is used for electrochemical sensing. And where here you can see these are flow focusing junctions for droplet based microfluidics. So we have used this for encapsulating microparticles, which you can clearly see them. We are getting into individual droplets. So it is especially used in biomedical application. And in this particular image, you can see we are encapsulating E. coli, which is bacteria, into individual droplets to see how it is growing in micro level. And another application is electrochemical sensing. While the droplets are being generated, we carry some analyte into it, which moves over to the electrodes to understand how this analyte is behaving in micro level. And this is a droplet-based PCR application, which we are in the nascent level, we are working on it. So these are huge applications. So another application, which is miniaturized sensing platform for detection of uric acid, will be explained by my colleague Avnash. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So here we discuss a novel miniaturized sensing platform for the detection of uric acid. So the motivation comes here. Using the polyamide sheet LIG in many wearable electronics due to its flexibility and mechanical properties. As we see in the picture, it shows enormous number of applications, like using it in making of sensors and supercapacitors or memory devices and so on. And this technology is very versatile, and it has very versatile properties like super hydrophobic and highly conductive in nature. So our group has also performed some of the experiments using the LIG. So as we see here, we can see the liquid level sensings and capacitive touchpads, which has been done using the polyamide sheet, laser induced graphene. So it was like successful for our group. And then going to the next slide. So here we discuss about how the functioning of a machine and a material is going to be performed. So generally we do a designing in any CAD software, and the CAD software, using the CAD software, we convert it into .dxf files where it has a set of moving axes. So then using the CO2 laser machine, placing the polyamide sheet underneath it, and then inducing the laser with different power and speed, we'll be able to ablate the graphene on the polyamide sheet. So we cannot claim that this can be a graphene. It can be a graphene oxide or reduced graphene oxide or like any carbon allotropes, which are like good in conductive in nature. So which can be further characterized using the Raman and XPS technologies. So LIG is basically a 3D porous material formed using a CO2 laser. And then generally in this method, formation of graphene or the carbon allotropes is like quite simple and easy. But whereas compared in earlier ways, using the chemical vapor deposition method, in which the graphene is first grown on porous substrates at a high temperatures, and then the substrate is subsequently etched so that to form different patterns on the substrates. So here we have a CO2 laser, which is of like VLS 3.60 model, and laser power we have like 60 watt, and the wavelength is like 10.6 micrometer. And we have different thicknesses varying from 5 mil to 10 mil. Here I'll explain how a microfluidic channel is made using the polyamide sheet. Generally in the first step, bonding a polyamide sheet and acrylic with a double-sided tape, and then inducing laser on top of it, of the polyamide sheet to form the graphene. And then the third step is like to peel the graphene off so that we can get a certain depth. It can be like 83 microns or like from 80 to 90 microns of depth we can acquire by one side of power and laser speed. By using the tape, we can peel it off, and then we can get a certain depth using that. And the D, traces of like formed graphene on polyamide sheet with the depth of as I said, like 80 microns after peeling it off. As we can see in the figure D, after maintaining like 2 to 3 times, we can get a depth of like 150 to 200 microns of depth of channel. And then the last step would be like inducing the 3 electrodes on top of the polyamide sheet, which acts like counter reference and working electrodes, which can be further can be coated with the silver, which acts as like a reference electrode here, and then covering it with a PDMS, polydimethyl siloxane. So it will act like a covered channel, which can be given with inlet and outlet. So here, a small video has been kept here, the fabrication of a novel miniaturized sensing platform. First, a polyamide sheet bonded with a double-sided tape, CO2 laser ablation on the polyamide sheet, then peeling it off to form certain depths as discussed, So it leaves some traces. By peeling it off, we'll get the graphene off. Again, ablating on the same place to form certain depths. And then in the last step, we'll be inducing laser to only to form the 3 electrodes. Then using screen printing technology, a silver ink is coated, which acts as a reference electrode. And then using what we say the flow 100 microliter of flow rate, we can get a channel. You can see the liquid flowing from one end to another end, which gives the detection of different acids. So here for sensing of uric acid, we have made a channel which is of like 76 into 26 mm of length and width. And then here the scale images shows the outlet, and here shows the fluid inlet, the silver coated one which acts as a reference electrode, and the working electrode and the counter electrodes which can be connected to the potentiostat for the detection of uric acid. So here in the figure 1a shows the comparative cyclic voltammetric response with and without the uric acid in PBS, that is phosphate buffer solution, at 10 millivolt per second scan rate. So here, while using this without the uric acid present, the PBS was not observed with any reduction or oxidation peaks here. But whereas when we have mixed with different proportionate of like uric acid, we have observed a peak and reduction and oxidation peaks, which shows that the device can be further be used for the detection of the uric acid. And then here the results shows after we got to confirm that using this device with limit of detection like 10 micromolar to 3 millimolar has been tested. So for from 10 millimolar to from 10 micromolar to 3 millimolar, here shows the different reduction of and oxidation peaks, which is like sensing using the fabricated devices. And the C and D shows the uric acid with different concentrations. I would like to conclude that by using this platform, the sensing of uric acid with a novel miniaturized platform has been using the laser-induced graphene was successfully performed, and with a limit of detection like 10 micromolar has been used for the testing. So the device can detect from 10 micromolar, and the sample size was 10 milliliters per sample with a continuous flow rate of like 100 microliter per minute was used for the detection. And even we have tested for the real sample analysis, that is like urine, we have tested whether we have the uric acid content in it or not. So by this, using MEMS technology in our lab, we have the facilities to different fabrication, to do different fabricated devices. So here the video shows how and what we have in the labs. So these are the 3D printers we have to fabricate the channels, and this is a Volterra PCB printer to make the conductive patterns, and this is used for conductivity measurement. And using the Graphtec cutter and plotter, we take different minimum widths to make the electrodes. And this is a wax printer to make the barriers on different platforms so that the liquids cannot be like combined. And we have the different microscopes to test. And this is Profile 3D, which we generally use to measure the thickness layer of different substrates. And we have microscope and direct UV laser writing, a photolithography process. And this we have a small workstation for microbial fuel cell. So we have still future equipments which can be procured for the experiment purposes. And this is a work area and the laboratory equipments which we So we would like to acknowledge our collaborators and funders, and we thank our EEE department for conducting this webinar.
Yes, Avinash, are we done or we still have some more to present?
Jagdish sir,
Yes, please.
can you please unmute Sanket Goyal sir, so that sir would like to present something?
Okay, 1 second.
Video.
Has he attended by the by his own name or some other name?
Yeah,
Can you
the
please
same name.
Just a second, please. Yeah. Okay, 1 second. Yeah.
Yeah, can you, well, thank you very much everyone for presenting and all the participants for their patience. Avinash, can you go a couple of slides ahead, like backside?
Yes,
or ahead? Yeah, right here. That's it, actually. Yeah, so, well, I think it must be a little fast for all of you, but because, you know, the world does not end here, it's just a beginning. So we request all of you to remain in touch with us, to respective PhD fellows and so on. So I just thought to share that we have been working in many areas, and some of these areas have been presented to you. And we have been funded by many government agencies, as you can see. Department of Health Research, Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, DST, ICMR, ISRO, and SCRB. So we request you that those of you who are interested, they can remain in touch with us. Can you please go to the next slide? Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are some of the patents which our PhD fellows, and many of them have presented today, have filed in the recent past, and we are seeing some of the commercial output for these patents. Next slide, please. Also, these are some of the accomplished publications in many different engineering domain and biochemistry domain. So you can see that there is a huge amount of output has been produced by our PhD fellows and other students. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, how to kickstart. I want to just spend 2 minutes on that. So I think next slide, please. So yeah, I mean, just keep going. Next slide. Yeah, these are some of the facilities which we have in our lab, and many of the facilities have been discussed by many fellow presenters. So we can carry on. This is the clean room we have, and I mentioned when we would like to have a silicon-based fabrication, we need to use a clean room because we are talking about some of the particles or some of the specimens which are in nano or micro size. So we don't want them to interfere with the air molecules or airborne aerosols. So ensuring that we get clean environment, we need to use such kind of clean room. You can imagine that a size of a transistor is in few nanometers. So if a small hair also drops on this silicon-based device, so it will short circuit many transistors. So to ensure that, we would like to work in the clean room. Next slide. Yeah, so one of the questions, especially those who are students, maybe undergrad or postgraduate, or maybe even the school pass outs, they may be having this in mind. We have presented so many things. We have shown you some of the cutting edge research work which is going on in our lab, but how do you involve? I mean, that is one question which I'm sure many of you might be having. So So basically, as I said, that it has a value chain. You can design it, you can fabricate it, detect it, and do the testing. You can design, you can involve yourself at any stage of this research. If you would like to work offline, and which is what is happening right now, you can probably work on some designing part. You can use some simple softwares like MATLAB or COMSOL. Of course, fabrication need to work physically and detection as well. But what I mean to say is that a lot of things, hundreds of things, which are small things, which will lead to a whole device development. You can also miniaturize devices like potentiostat and some of the other devices which we are using. We are using some bulk devices. People can work on miniaturizing them. And machine learning and IoT is some area where we would like everybody to work on, because we would like to discuss this thing in a different scale where people can come and people can remotely access the data. Yeah, so basically this is what the technological evolution which I discussed earlier, and the trend will go on. So I think I would sort of end here by mentioning that the development of miniaturized devices is certainly required, and not only required, but also required in a smart manner, considering the accuracy, cost, and time into the picture. And also I have mentioned, I reiterate that what is the priority depending on what is required in today's world. So all of you are welcome to be in touch with us, and we'll be really happy to help you as much as we can. And we would like to thank you again for your valuable time and participation. But we would like to request you to please interact with us. Thank you so very much. And again, I want to thank all the sponsors, Swechha, and our team led by Jagdish, and the funders, the Department of State, for giving this opportunity to convey what we are doing to all of you. Thank you so very much.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Goel. Avinash, is there anything that you want to probably say, or do you want me to give the end remarks?
So please, if you would like to add something, I request you to add, and then we would like to close the session here.
Okay, right then. So no, my question is, do you have anything to add, or you want me to take up now?
No, sir. From my end, no, sir.
Right. Wonderful, wonderful. Good to hear. Okay, at the outset, again, before I close this session, let me thank each and everyone who has participated, spent their valuable 2 hours of time close to. And I'm pretty sure you must have gained some good insights into miniaturized sensors, the technology, applications, and the development as well. I would like to thank Dr. Sanket Goel and Dr. Dubey for their invaluable suggestions and the presentation as well. And I would also like to thank the PhD scholars who were behind this presentation and also shared their experiences and work at BITS Pilani, Hyderabad. Let me begin with Mr. J. Murali Mohan, Mr. Prakash Revatkar, Mr. Tatarov, Mr. Abhishesh Pal, Mr. S. Shrikant, and of course, Mr. Avinash Koturu. Of course, he was my previous colleague, so I thank him very sincerely for making this happen, in fact. And I would like to thank the entity Storm Overseas Education for bringing this up. And there are okay, I would also like to give information on the certificate and also the presentation part. To begin with, as provided in the chat, please fill the feedback form with the name that you intend to have on your certificate, and the e-certificate will be sent to you by end of this week to your registered email. Second, regarding the presentation, we have permission to share the video recording, and of course, we would request Dr. Goel to share the presentation after removing the confidential segments of the presentation. So that would be sent to the registered emails as well. Yeah, that's it for now. And then if you are looking for more such webinars, please download the app, Storm app. It is available in both Android and iOS platforms as well. Thank you all so much. I assume that you had a wonderful session. Thank you. Great day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Avinash. Thank you, Dr. Goel and team.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
good day. And if you have any questions, we can actually we still have 10 to 15 minutes of time. If you have any quick questions.
Yeah, sir.
Yeah, participants, please, if you have any questions. Thank you, Divesh. Thank you, Natish. Thank you, Roshni. Thank you, Chandu. Anyone, if you have any questions, even if you have questions, post this. And also we have a discussion forum, as I have mentioned. Please go to My History, and there you will find the discussion forum. You can discuss with the team, post the session as well. Please go to My History in the webinar section of Storm mobile app. There you will find a discussion forum. Right then, I see there are no questions. So let me allow to end the session here. See you again in a different webinar session on a different day. Till then, be safe. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.